They thought it would be just another quiet morning on the Caribbean. 0619. 140 nautical miles off the Venezuelan coast. The USS Gerald R. Ford moved like a steel city across calm water. The sky was clear, the sea flat, but the tension hung so heavy you could feel it through the deck plates. Then the shadows appeared. 2 Venezuelan Kilo. 8 fighters dropped in low, barely 2,000 feet above the waves. Coming in fast with no IFF, no radio call, no courtesy warning. They sliced across the carrier's bow in a hard, deliberate cut, a move meant to provoke, not to patrol. On the bridge, the response was calm, almost cold. Maintain course. The message was simple. The Ford was operating in international waters, legally, confidently, and without apology. But this was no routine patrol. Not today. Because that reckless flyby was only the first spark, and the sky was about to get crowded. 0621. For a moment, the deck crew thought the provocation was over. The 2 Kilo 8 fighters pulled away toward the Venezuelan coastline, climbing shallow like they were simply returning to base. The bridge crew watched them fade into the morning haze, and a few sailors exhaled for the first time in minutes. But the radar saw what the eye didn't. 2 new tracks, same direction, much higher speed. Then the computer stitched the picture together. 4 aircraft total, regrouping, forming a loose, wide spread. No IFF, no radio calls, no transponder behavior that hinted at training or accident. This was deliberate. What started as a flyby had turned into a pattern. On the Ford's CIC screens, the icons glowed a hard amber, the pre-threat color that means this could go bad fast. The electronic warfare team switched to passive capture mode, pulling every signature from the incoming jets. Their emissions were erratic, another sign of intentional posturing. The Venezuelan aircraft tightened formation, then fanned out again, like they were rehearsing pressure tactics. The Ford didn't react. No hard turn, no increase in speed. The carrier moved like a glacier of steel, steady and immune to intimidation. But inside the bubble, everyone understood the shift. This was no longer a show. This was the kind of encounter where one wrong assumption leads straight to an international incident, fast, loud, and irreversible. And the air picture was still getting darker. To understand what was happening over the Caribbean, you had to look past the jets and the sea spray. You had to look at doctrine, politics, and the kind of gray zone tactics that weaker nations copy from bigger ones. International law was clear. The waters were global commons. The Ford had every right to operate there, conducting routine patrols under freedom of navigation principles that the United States enforces worldwide. But Caracas saw something else. They saw an opportunity to probe, to test how a carrier strike group would react if pushed just enough, but not too far. The Hongdu-built Kilo 8 wasn't a frontline fighter. It was a training jet with light attack capability. But that was the point. A nation could use it to harass a supercarrier without risking its premier aircraft. If anything went wrong, they could claim it was a miscommunication or a training oversight. The political machinery behind this maneuver was no mystery. Venezuela had been under pressure at home, economic strain, diplomatic friction. The leadership needed a show of defiance, a moment to declare that they could stand up to the imperialists operating near their coast. And so they reached for the same playbook used in the South China Sea. Intimidation without escalation. Proximity without commitment. Pressure without open fire. Only this time, they aimed it at the most advanced carrier on the planet. And the Ford's response was about to reveal something Venezuela wasn't expecting. 0623. A single call from the tactical action officer cut through the Ford's combat information center. Recommend tightening escort screen. Dray now. That was all it took. Within seconds, the destroyers Mason and Hudner adjusted course, sliding forward into a protective wedge ahead of the carrier. Their Aegis arrays rotated with deliberate calm, scanning, locking, tracking, not threatening, just watching. But the kind of watching that tells an adversary, "We see everything you are doing." Above the deck, the response was sharper. Two F/A-18 Echo Super Hornets were launched into the sky, their engines roaring like ripping metal. Their mission was simple: intercept, identify, stabilize the air picture. Not provoke, not escalate, just draw a line that no Venezuelan pilot could pretend not to notice. The Hornets climbed to 15,000 feet, wings glinting under the early sun. Every sensor went hot. Every frequency band lit up. They made contact with the incoming Kilo 8 formation in less than 3 minutes. Yet despite the show of force, the Ford itself didn't change a thing. No speed increase. No evasive turn. No break in course. That was the American doctrine. The carrier never flinches. The escorts maneuver. The fighters intercept. But the carrier? She stays the course. Unshaken, unhurried. A message carved into the sea. And for Venezuela, that calm was more intimidating than any missile battery. Because a force that doesn't react emotionally is a force prepared for anything. 0626. The sky turned into a knife's edge. As the Hornets closed the gap, the Venezuelan pilots pushed the envelope, performing maneuvers that NATO would label in 2 words: unsafe and unprofessional. The distance between jets shrank 800 meters, then 400, then barely 200. At that range, the slightest turbulence could send metal into metal. Then one Kilo 8 dove. Hard. It dropped to just above wave height, streaking across the sea like a thrown spear, its flight path carved straight past the bow of the destroyer Mason. The wake turbulence alone rattled the ship's forward sensors. Inside the Hornet cockpits, alarms began to chorus. Proximity alert, collision warning, threat envelope approaching. Below deck, the ship's defensive systems woke up. The close-in weapon systems spun to warm standby, barrels angled like a coiled fist. CRAM cued targeting protocols. Neither system fired, but both were one command away from automatic engagement if a hostile lock was detected. This was the line. The razor edge between peace and a shooting war. One mistaken radar ping, one panicked maneuver, one misinterpreted intercept. That was all it would take. The Hornets held formation steady, disciplined, refusing to be baited. The American pilots knew the stakes. A carrier strike group wasn't just hardware, it was national signaling. And right now, the signal had to be control, not aggression. But the Venezuelan jets weren't finished yet. Not even close. 0637. Without warning, the Kilo 8 formation broke off. One by one, they peeled away, turning south toward Venezuelan territory. No radio call, no explanation, just a silent, shallow retreat. But the last jet had a parting gift. For a brief second, barely long enough to trigger automatic logs, its radar cone swept across the Ford. A soft lock. Momentary, but intentional. The electronic warfare board lit up, caught it, recorded it, analyzed it. It was not a mistake. It was a final message. The bridge did nothing. No turn, no change in course, no response transmission. The Ford stayed on her track as if the sky were empty and the sea belonged to no one. Inside the CIC, analysts tagged the lock as a deliberate gray zone act, one last push to see if the carrier group would break discipline. They didn't. Minutes later, the Kilo 8 blips vanished from radar. Just like that, the incident was over. At least on the surface. But the Pentagon would study this encounter. The patterns, the timing, the maneuvering, the radar behavior. Venezuela wasn't acting alone. These tactics mirrored strategies used by nations with far more experience in maritime brinkmanship. This wasn't a random stunt, it was a test, and the Ford had answered without firing a shot. In Caracas, state television wasted no time. Anchors declared victory, claiming their pilots had forced the American carrier to withdraw. Footage was cut, edited, dramatized, a story crafted for domestic pride. But the truth traveled farther. The United States Department of Defense released its own statement. The Ford never altered course, not by an inch. Satellite data, ship logs, and air tracks confirmed it. The carrier strike group had held formation and held discipline. At the Pentagon, analysts reached a simple conclusion. Venezuela had executed a classic gray zone probe small enough to deny intent, dangerous enough to risk catastrophe. A test of willpower. A test the United States answered with calm steel. Because sometimes the strongest message is restraint, and sometimes peace isn't quiet, it's controlled. If you want to see more real naval encounters like this, make sure you follow, hit notifications, and subscribe to the channel. The next story is already on the horizon.